All right. Thank you for staying with us. The conversation is about, the three tiers of government: the executive, the legislature, and of course, the judiciary. So we're staying with the judiciary this morning, which is an essential part of any nation, because you talk about the rule of law, you talk about justice, you talk about equity, and all of these must be in place for a society, for any nation to have peace, because a nation without these things cannot actually experience peace, because people will be living with bias, people will be living with parochial interests, people will be living in a society, that's not balanced, that anybody can do anything because they know there is no deterrent to that. But for us not to have that, and of course, that's not the kind of nation anybody wants to have. So the judiciary in Nigeria, you believe with me, has been the eye of the storm, especially in the last few months, past few years as well. Of course, there will be challenges. And of course, when you talk about justice, not so many people will want to agree with what Milord says, either the magistrate court, the court of appeal, the high court, and the state federal high court, even up to the Supreme Court, because sometimes, because of our selfish nature as humans, when a court judgment doesn't favor one might tend to throw tantrums here and there. But now, when this becomes a pattern, when the inconsistency is loud, then many persons will be worried to say what is happening. Coming from our Alu chamber, the temple of justice, everything, in as much the justices themselves are, or magistrates, they are human, but then the margin for error should be very minute. And this morning, as in the past few days, we've seen a change of pattern, especially from Justice Kayode Ariwoola, who just retired after the attainment of 70 years. He has passed the baton to the most senior justice in rank, which is now Justice Kudirat Kekere-Ekun, and she's the one right now. So this morning, we'll be looking into what happened, what transpired under the leadership of former Justice Kekere-Ekun, and the task ahead for the new justice, the Chief Justice of Nigeria right now, my Lord Justice Kekere-Ekun. By the way, let's just give you a very brief rundown about the Chief Justice that we are talking about here, Justice Kekere-Ekun, who is now the one in charge of the court right now. Very quickly, according to the National Judicial Council, Honorable Justice Kudirat Motomori Olatokunbo Kekere-Ekun, that's her full name, is a justice of the Supreme Court and assumed the position of the Chief Justice of Nigeria right now. Honorable Justice Kudirat Motomori Olatokunbo Kekere-Ekun, CFR GSC Ni Fashinro, was born on May 7, 1958. She obtained her LLB in 1980 from the University of Lagos, and LLM from the London School of Economic and Political Science in November 1983. She was called to the Nigerian Bar 10th July 1981. And from 1985 to 1999, she was in private practice and was later appointed a senior magistrate grade 2, Lagos State Judiciary. In December 1989, she was appointed a judge of the High Court of Lagos State. On July 19, 1996, she served as chairman of Robbery and Firearms Tribunal, Zone 2, Ikeja, Lagos, from 1996, November to May 1999. Honorable Justice Kekere-Ekun was elevated to the Court of Appeal on 22nd September 2004, where she served in various divisions of the court and as presiding justice of 2 divisions of the court in Makurdi and Akure. She was elevated to the Supreme Court of Nigeria, the fifth female justice of the court, and was sworn in on Monday, 8 July 2013. She has attended numerous courses and seminars within and outside Nigeria and has also received several merit awards. Honorable Kekere-Ekun, Justice Kekere-Ekun rather, is a life bencher, a member of the International Association of Women Judges, and currently is president. And of course, Justice Kekere-Ekun is now the Chief Justice of Nigeria in acting capacity. She's happily married with children. That's just a brief rundown of Lord Kekere-Ekun. Right now, we are being joined by Samuel Lloyd Atiku. Samuel Lloyd Atiku is a research and impact evaluation associate, University of Bristol. He joins us via Zoom this morning. Good morning, Mr. Atiku.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the program.
Very well. I'm sure you just had me reel out, a brief CV of Justice Kekere-Ekun, and we're talking about the task ahead for her. But before that, for us, for any society or an individual to have a proper projection, you must evaluate where you are coming from, where you are now, and then for you to take up the challenges ahead to know what is obtainable for the future. How will you describe what happened under Justice Ariwola, the former CGN, who is now retired? It's few years in office, some of the achievement he has been able to make, some of the challenges, and we are going to be speaking about some of his recommendations as well. But how will you view, as a Nigerian, as a research and impact associate, the judiciary under Justice Ariwola?
I think it's important to think through, you look closely at one, the perception that lawyers themselves have about the justice system, and then you look at even retired judges, what they think of the justice system, and then by extension, we can look at what the population will think about the justice system. Recently, Citizen Gavel, working with Citizen Gavel, we did an evaluation of the perception of what lawyers think of the justice system and then retired judges think of the justice system. And there were 8 key things that came out. The first one is about transparency. They did complain that the decision-making metrics, right? 62% of lawyers in Nigeria that were surveyed, don't let me say in Nigeria, that were surveyed, and the people that were surveyed were almost close to about 2,000. They said 62% of them said that the decision-making within the justice system was not transparent enough. And that one way or the other helps exacerbate this concept of mistrust in the system. Now, when you anchor around what retired judges are talking about, 91% of them said, oh, some of these these judgments were not clear enough for them. 91% of retired judges. That's how terrible when you think about where the justice system is in terms of transparency. The second key point here is about adherence to ethical standards. 55% of lawyers perceive that judges were not adhering to those standards. Interestingly, 71% of judges said, oh, that decision-making is always wind around controversies. Essentially, what they're saying in essence is that 71% of retired judges were saying that judges were not adhering to ethical standards. That's how terrible where we are in terms of the baseline that we're drawing for the incoming CJN. Now, in terms of external influence, 96% of lawyers perceive that decision-making within the justice system in Nigeria is always being influenced by external, what I call external factors, not the fact and the evidence presented before the judge, which is again raising a lot of questions. Of course, 12% of judges said they have encountered those kind of influence. So if you look at it, 12% are saying, no, they've at some point in time when they were serving, pressures have been mounted on them by external parties. Of course, the judges will not typically come out and say, because again, judges are very, very careful how they use their word. Well, regardless of that, 12% of judges that were surveyed said at some point in time, they've gotten that big call saying that they need to manipulate this thing or do this thing. That's how bad things are. That's number 3. Number 4, in terms of the impact of those judgments itself, when you look at it, 59% of judges said that these decisions are controversial and it's the reason why the public actually do not trust the justice system. Interestingly, they said, oh, they wind it around. Judges were saying that 59% of why the public do not trust them is one way or the other connected to this lack of transparency, the lack of ethical standards, and the external pressure, and then the internal corruption things. So those are the building blocks of how we perceive in terms of drawing a baseline of where we are as a country. Now, building on that, when there are challenges, there's a need to actually have a complaint system, a procedure for making complaint. The interesting thing itself is that 96% of lawyers in Nigeria say they have never used those complaint systems. They've not complained through the required channel because they don't trust those channels. Again, that shows clearly that there's a disconnection between what people are thinking about. If there are problems, who do you complain to? The procedure is riddled in a lot of problems, and then the lawyers themselves are not using those channels. Now, when you ask judges themselves, the judges perceive that those channels are actually efficient. So again, when you compare both, there's a disconnection. The judges are saying the channels are there for you to use, but the lawyers are saying these channels are very cumbersome for us to use. And essentially, so when you encounter issues, who do you complain to?
Mr. Atiku,
Because most of them
Mr.
end up
Atiku, if I may
complaining.
butt in very quickly, these particular complaints of some lawyers about they possibly not trusting those channels to lay their complaints, has that always been the case? You know, is it a judiciary thing, or it was more pronounced under Justice Ariwola retired?
So, well, I mean, this is the first time I'm drawing. I mean, just like I said, it's a baseline study. It's just to understand where we are and then see how you make progress as you move along. So I don't know. I've looked at the literature. I've not seen anybody do this in the past. So we cannot compare where we're coming from, maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and compare to now. But what I know is that presently where we are, in terms of the base of where we're starting from, is that 96% of lawyers do not use this channel. Only very tiny bit of the people surveyed actually do pass up their complaints, maybe to the National Judicial Council or through channels that have been created for them to complain. And when they complain, they presume also 31% of those that have complained presume that those complaints are oftentimes being jettisoned. They are not carried along, right? They don't do the necessary investigation, and that again dampens and then deepens the mistrust that we talk about in this justice system. I will anchor on these two things in rounding. I will say one, it's not enough for us to think of the justice system as being corrupt and say, oh, they are corrupt. I mean, it's a buzzword to throw around and say people are corrupt and all those things. I think lawyers themselves are beginning to become worried about the salaries judges are collecting. And there's this wide perception that if you are being paid this low amount of money and you have to build security around yourself, you are susceptible also to being corrupt. So there are question marks around the remuneration system we have in the justice system and how that is exacerbating this whole mistrust thing. There are big questions around the transparency around salaries. So for lawyers, I mean, for judges that are actually at the lower level, they presume that those at the higher level make decisions without carrying them along. So within the justice system, again, there are a lot of, I'll call it public participation issues rankling out, and that's building mistrust. So in concluding, I like to use this word, that it's important to say that transparency itself is not about restoring trust in the system, but rather transparency is actually the politics of managing mistrust. So if we are not transparent as a country, people will tend to believe that that system is corrupt, and that's where we are. And I'm believing that the new CJN coming in would need to actually take this head on and actually begin to rebuild that mistrust. Begin to address those issues around mistrust as we move towards having an effective and efficient justice system in Nigeria.
Yeah, very well. And I think some of the concern you raised, that maybe some lawyers raised, has been addressed about the issue of emolument, because we learned there is 300% increase, in the emolument salary of judicial officials, especially under this administration right now. But then we'll get to that. But Tommy.
All right, so you've spoken about some of the lapses of the retired CJN. So let's talk about the achievement of the past CJN. What are some of his achievements, and how did they impact the judiciary?
Yeah, in thinking of, I'll call it the achievement. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I will always look at the data itself.
Yeah.
I think it's important to say that there are a little bit of shifts And I will mention 5 key things that comes to mind when you think of the CJ. I think at some point in time, it did try to work on the transparency, especially if you look at one of the biggest, I'll call it the building blocks. When you think about the judicial system, you look at the political system and you look at what happens during elections and then what happens after elections. Again, post-election issues and then post-election issues and then after election. Those are the people, everybody will focus on that. Yeah, I think to some degree, listening to some lawyer, they presume that, why there are issues in there, I think sometimes, thinking of it one way or the other, I think they tried one way or the other to strengthen accountability in that space. I think that's one key thing we see. Why majority of lawyers don't think that, at least substantial amount of lawyers think that one way or the other, at least they try to become transparent around the selection of judges, and then they try to also make sure that they release at least judgment so that people could actually take that on head-on, and then they use that. Of course, people can always context that, but that's the perception of lawyers. I think the second thing also is about resisting external pressure. I think to some degree, why the public were actually bombarding the CJN around external pressure, I think, and then when you think of external pressure, it comes in both ways, right? You think of it in terms of the public trying to actually influence the justice system because of massive social media bombardment. And then on the flip side also, you have some big politicians also trying to influence. I think to some degree, staying out of those loops and actually taking decision out of those loops was also very critical. And if you remember, before the election, there were a lot of how will I call it now? There were a lot of cases that were flying right and center that people were presuming that, these cases could actually truncate Nigeria's pathway towards having a good election. I think to some degree, those were actually being stamped down, if you think of it also. We can talk about remuneration. It has improved slightly. The pay scale of the justice system had gone a little bit up. We are not where we should be, but to some degree, salaries have been increased. I think those are the positive things there. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I've not looked at every case and begin to analyze decision making from that spectrum and say, okay, this has been what has happened. But those are key things those are the highlights of things that the lawyers themselves did mention that one way or the other were key things, key highlights, key positive things that happened in recent time.
All right. Former Justice Kekere-Ekun, while he was living, he, highlighted on some of the things that have been done and some key recommendations as well. He disclosed that he signed off on the new rules following reviews by his successor, this same successor of his, who is not the CJ now, my Lord Justice Kekere-Ekun, and brother justices of the Apex Court, Justice Zinya Ngokoro, Justice Moreni KG, Helen Ogunwumijo, Dr. Muiz Banira SCN, and Yakubu C. Mikeo SCN, who is the SWAL, president of the NBA. And he said the rules regulating procedures in the Apex Court were those made in 1985, when information technology, electronic transactions, telecom, among others, were either not in existence or in their formative stages. He said the new rules now recognize the dynamic and contemporary global changing demands of both the court and the legal profession, and he highlighted some of these key points. Number one, virtual filings, that right now there is an accommodation for virtual filings. You don't have to go to court in person, that there is an e-portal filing that will be made available, to cancel by the court. Talked about the speedy hearing and parties to serve. He said more duties have been imposed on lawyers to aid the speedy hearing of appeals, 21-day grace to file for extension of time. And, let me quote him. He said, if you have 7 days to file a process for extension of time and you do not do so, you have another 7 days automatically to do the needful. After the cumulative 14 days, you have another 7 days to do that. Number 4, bond or warranty required for appeals in monetary judgment. To ensure diligence in monetary judgment, the Apex Court will require a warranty or bond from a reliable and reputable financial institution as a condition to hear the appeal. Again, number 5, he said, no stay of proceedings where rules had disobeyed. According to the new rules, the apex court will not grant a stay of proceedings in an interlocutory appeal brought before it by if the appeal fails to comply with the condition of appeal. And he talked about punitive cost on lawyers. With regards to cost, the apex court will now adequately award cost to compensate the respondent for the time spent coming to court. And I think he was trying to, or he highlighted on these things based on what he has been able to achieve under his reign, the recommendations made by a committee, headed by his successor as well. And he talked about some of those things. So, Mr. Atiku, will you see some of those things as really transformative? Because he said the rules made in 1985 may not be consistent with what we have in 2024 with the advent of technology, telecoms, ICT, and the rest of them. So, for him to have highlighted this, and this is what we have done, this is the way it is right now, will you say, okay, maybe it's not gloom and doom after all?
Yeah, I think for us as impact evaluators, right, we evaluate impact. We don't necessarily focus our attention too much looking at procedures that you put on ground, but we look at the downline, the impact of what you've done, essentially. So, for instance, if we go to the court system, can we ask ourselves this hard question? How many people, because of this procedure, how many people, if you look at the justice system, for instance, if you look at the prisons, substantial amount of people in the prison are awaiting trials. The question is that this procedure helped us reduce that. I think the answer is no. I think it's a good start, but the answer remains no. In terms of the judicial independence itself, this new procedure has been able to actually push to the public that, the judicial system is independent from external influence. There are still big question marks around that. For instance, how are judges selected for electoral tribunals? How do you select those judges? How do you pick them up? Those things are not transparent. So those frameworks are still missing and it's still not clear to people. In terms of, when you look at it in terms of the reform initiative in there, they are there. Those are good procedural start points. But the truth is that the downline is what we look at as people. And the downline is still missing. Because again, just like I said, talk to lawyers, they have those issues. They are still hanging in there. They still complain that these procedures are still not clear to them. The retired judges are saying, no, there's no, for instance, somebody make up a judgment and then you're seeing almost 96% of judges saying that judgment it's actually filled with a lot of inconsistency. Those are big question marks that we are here to address. Right. And then when there are complaints, when there are issues, how do you address those issues? Do you investigate them? Those are big block of where we look at impact. It's important to mention that to get to those areas, definitely you have to take those steps. Those steps,
quickly, Mr. Atiku, because of time,
maybe by next year we begin to see it. But as I'm speaking to you today, this year, having conversation with lawyers, majority of them will tell you that those steps have not translated to improve outcome, and that's where we will anchor on.
We're speaking to you as a researcher, as an impact, evaluate professional, and that's why we are having this first leg, because we'll still speak with a lawyer very soon. Let's talk about the task ahead of the new CGN right now, because you talked, I remember in your introduction, you talked about perception, which is quite key, about the judiciary, people having the trust, to know. We are not even talking about politicians right now, because with due respect to them, you might not really want to take their word, because there is this idea that whenever a court judgment favors a politician, it is victory for democracy. When it doesn't favor them, they cast aspersion on the same judiciary as well. So, but talking as a Nigerian that wants this nation to work, what will you call the task ahead? Because a couple of senior lawyers have made, their submission. Let me just take some of them. Tomilola and said there is need to be a rethinking, repositioning, restoration, rebranding, and rejigging of the judiciary. That's from the Leonard Silk. And Olisa Agbakuba, SCN, said the court presently works on the 1844 model of the English court. The challenge for the new CGN is to turn these around. And let me take one more. Daudu, SCN, said the incoming CGN should push for the creation of constitutional courts at three trials three tiers rather, the trial, the appellate, and the final, for the determination of political and other allied matters. These are learned silk. Do you agree with them? And as a researcher as well, do you have any addition talking about the task ahead of the new acting CJN?
I mean, absolutely. If you look at what they're saying also, I think it's consistent with what we've been saying initially. I mean, it's what we saw, having spoken to almost 3,000 lawyers in the country. I think it's clear. I mean, it's weird when you listen. Of course, I don't like using the word weird. When you listen to what some lawyers are saying, some lawyers will tell you that certain cases, I mean, if a particular lawyer in court is involved in a case, that case is as good as lost or won. That's how complicated the whole system is. And so the big trust, again, I keep reiterating, 62%, lawyers says these decisions are not transparent. I think it's consistent with what has been said here. We need to ensure that how you arrive at your decision needs to be logical. You need to follow a scientific process, of course, the legal process. You need to explain clearly, and that becomes a precedent, right? That other judges can look up to and say, yeah, this is actually in line with how we should think. But unfortunately, what we have today is that majority of court cases, I mean, decision making, 96% of lawyers are saying that it's redoed. Sorry, 91% are saying those decision makings are redoed with a lot of inconsistency. So even the justice themselves do not believe that the justice system in Nigeria is transparent enough, and that people's decision, the decision that is coming out of that system, is consistent and logical. And that's a big question that we need to start addressing. The second one is the impact of public trust. Yes, the justice, how do you address those mistrust? Is to become more transparent about your decision making. The external pressure, we need to address them. How do we address them? Again, transparency on one level. Number two, you need to begin to address things like remuneration, and then your ethical standard that you're setting on ground itself, you need to ensure that they actually adhere to strictly. And how do you adhere to it strictly? It means that the complaint system, when people notice that there's an ethical lapses, people can complain through a particular channel, and that channel, you know that when you complain to that channel, definitely there will be investigation. And of course, if people are found culpable, those people will be forced to actually face the cost of the court. So those are issues, right? Then there's the corruption influence also itself. I mean, 91% of legal professionals are saying that they have, at some point in time, they've actually encountered corruption. 91% of lawyers have said they've encountered issues around corruption. That's massive. 47% of lawyers say yes, they've come in contact with this. 47% of them. So we need to address that itself. Again, that's a big issue. We need to be transparent around how judges are actually selected, especially for those big money-making ventures, right? Political, electoral tribunal. We need to be transparent around how people are actually being selected. In fact, you will be shocked that you will see some judges that had made controversial decisions in the past that had been actually wound out by I would like appellate courts actually dismiss them because most of those judgments were not based on fact and all those things. Those judges are still back. In fact, some of them are even at the appellate court, continue to actually foster very, very funny judgments. I mean, those are the things that lawyers are complaining. It's not from my mouth, right? Those are scientific things that majority of lawyers are complaining about. And until we address those issues, and then we put that in public light itself, definitely it's not out of place for me to actually say, yes, I don't believe in the justice system in Nigeria. And that's actually very sad because the justice system should actually be the voice of the society itself. It's actually at the heart of every society you build. It's what actually ensures that a society lives in terms of harmony. There's harmony in society. There's law, there's order in society. Unfortunately, people don't trust that system. Of course, what you get is anarchy, and that's where we are as a country in Nigeria.
All right. Very key to put it that particular way as well. Very quickly, because I told you we will be speaking with a lawyer as well. And but then, because time is of essence, we want to sincerely thank you for your time. and take this morning a research and impact evaluation expert, Samuel Lloyd Atiku. Thank you for your time. And, as we say, the reason why we have this program is to have a working and a better nation. And I hope we achieve that very soon and even beyond now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on the program. Yeah, hopefully the country will continue to move in the positive direction. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
Thank you very much. And we take this quick break. When we return, we'll be speaking with a lawyer to give us the legal and, of course, perspective to this matter. Stay with us.